Welcome back to the Infinite Jungle. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the main takeaways of all core developers' consensus call number 152, where developers have set forth a new game plan for Pectra testing in light of how the Holesky and Sepolia testnet upgrades went. Before we get started with the show, here is a quick show disclaimer. I need to remind you to please refer to the disclaimer linked in the podcast show notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice, an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Let me start off the show with an update on Holesky. The last monologue episode I did on the Infinite Jungle, I talked about developers' game plan for restoring the Holesky testnet. That plan did not work. Holesky is still in a state of non-finalization. Developers were not able to restore the network back to a state of finality, which is a state of heightened security for the network. The testnet is still struggling to reach 2 epochs of over 66% of validators correctly attesting to the same head of the chain. However, developers haven't given up. That first plan did not work, but on the latest all-core developers call, developers are still committed to restoring Holesky for use long-term so that they can test other Ethereum upgrades on it. Developers are still trying to expedite slashing of bad validators off the network. They are coordinating and continuing to call for share different ways that node operators on Holesky can turn off their slashing protections. Encouraging node operators to upgrade their clients if they haven't already, so that new validators that they spin up on Holesky are correctly attesting to the head of the chain. The Holesky testnet, the way that it operates, it's being operated by a variety of different Ethereum stakeholders, including application developers, layer 2s, infrastructure providers. And so all of the effort that's going into restoring Holesky is a community effort. And developers, although developers tried to coordinate a mass slashing event and tried to kind of kickstart the network into a state of finality so that the Holesky network can kind of get back to normal, and all of the validators and the users and the applications on there can start testing again. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, but developers are continuing to work and chip away at getting the message out there and reaching out to as many stakeholders as they can to make sure that clients are updated and bad validators have been booted off the network, and the rest of the remaining validators are all correctly attesting to the same chain, and hopefully get to that state of at least 66% of validators correctly attesting to the chain, be able to justify an epoch, and then have a second epoch, a second period of time. I believe, again, it's like 6.4 minutes per epoch to get another second epoch also justified with more than 66% of validators, and together get the network back into a state of finalization, which would significantly help networking, peer-to-peer connections, so that nodes can find other peers in the network to receive messages and help validate the chain and just keep the chain going. Some of the analysis that developers shared on the latest ACD call, they shared that based on the rate at which bad validators are being booted off the Holesky network, so this is taking into account things like inactivity leaks, the amount of time it takes for a slash validator to fully exit the network. Based on this analysis, it appears that Holesky could enter into a state of finalization by March 28th. That is 3 weeks from now, which is still long. However, this timeline could be expedited if more validators are turning off their slashing protections and more validators are correctly attesting to the head of the chain. And since the ACD call, I believe a lot more of the community has responded. The Ethereum community has responded, and Holesky appears to be having a participation rate of validators of about 50%, which is quite close to 66%. So, looking more optimistic than it was last week when I was giving the update on the state and the status of the Holesky testnet. And again, developers are just chipping away at continuing to try and restore the network. They have also, specifically consensus layer client teams, have issued a variety of updates to their clients to ensure that their clients, any validator that's running their client, can continue to attest to a chain, a version of Ethereum that is in a state of prolonged non-finalization. So in the worst case scenario where validators are not able to come to agreement about what the correct head of the chain is, and the network is not able to finalize, these clients will still continue to work. These nodes will still continue to operate and still continue to attest to what their client thinks is the correct head of the chain. And these are really useful updates to clients in kind of a worst case scenario. Of course, none of the developers want Ethereum mainnet to ever fall into a state of non-finalization, especially extended non-finalization on mainnet. But it is healthy for consensus layer client teams to be issuing fixes so that in such a scenario, their clients would still be able to work. The software would still be able to work, and users would still be able to run validators, and it wouldn't be the end of the world. So client teams, consensus layer client teams are I'm going to actually share, I'll link in the show notes a kind of a thread of what one of the client teams have done already to make their client more resilient in circumstances of prolonged non-finalization. That's the Lodestar team. Actually, I was scrolling through my ex before recording this show, and his tweet was one that popped up, and I thought it was a really good example of some of the ways in which consensus layer client teams are just issuing fixes, really positive fixes to their clients in light of what's going on Holesky. So that's the update. That is the update on the status of Holesky. Let's talk about the Sepolia upgrade and how that went. Sepolia, the only other public testnet for Ethereum, developers upgraded on March 5th, Wednesday, March 5th, so just a couple days before we're recording this episode. And no, it did not go smoothly. Developers discovered another major bug in clients that they had to rapidly issue a hotfix for. It was a little bit nerve-wracking, I will say. In the first couple hours after that upgrade went live, I was worried, oh my gosh, are we going to have another major testnet failure like what we saw in Holesky? What does this mean for Pectra? However, developers very quickly got Sepolia back up and running, back to a state of finality, back to a state of normalcy. The issue that client teams discovered was again related to the validator deposit contract. This time, I don't believe it was because of a misconfigured deposit contract address across the clients. This was actually related more to the functionality, the permission functionality of the Sepolia deposit contract. So as a recap, or as a kind of good to know as context, I should say, developers have created two public Ethereum testnets, Holesky and Sepolia, that they actively maintain. There are some smaller public testnets like Ephemery that developers also maintain. However, these are the two big ones that most stakeholders, applications, and staking providers, infrastructure providers really test their software on. Holesky is larger as a testnet. More applications and smart contracts are deployed on there. However, Sepolia, it's a testnet that has a more controlled environment. So for the deposit contract on Holesky and, of course, the validator deposit contract on mainnet, anyone can deposit. Anyone anyone can spin up a new validator on these networks. Sepolia, the deposit contract is permissioned, so you have to be whitelisted in order to make a deposit to the Sepolia deposit contract and create new validators on the testnet. This unique quality of Sepolia is really what tripped up and caused the bug that was seen on Wednesday. Because of this, basically the issue was that validators on Sepolia post-Pectra activation, could not include transactions into blocks. Sepolia was progressing. There wasn't a major chain split, but the blocks being produced by the validators on Sepolia were empty. The developers did issue a fix within a matter of hours. They had a coordination call within, I think, an hour after the Pectra upgrade went live on Sepolia, and they were able to coordinate an update to all clients and validators very shortly after that fix was issued. The Sepolia network was back to normal. And on the latest ACD call, the chair of the call, Alex Stokes, he said that Sepolia is the healthiest he's ever seen it. So yet another kind of silver lining. It really whipped all of the Sepolia node operators into kind of like alert mode of what to do in a state of there's an active bug. How do we resolve it? The communication for the Sepolia issue, I would say, was a lot more coordinated than the communication that happened for the Holesky incident, which I think caught developers a little bit by surprise. It seemed as though developers were a lot more prepared to address the issues that were seen on Sepolia, and the outcome was very different. Sepolia is not broken, and stakeholders can now continue to test their infrastructure, test different features of Pectra on Sepolia, But that said, Sepolia didn't go as smoothly, of course, as developers ideally wanted it to. Ideally, there wouldn't have been a bug. The bug, again, is very unique to the way that the deposit contract on Sepolia works, because Sepolia is a permissioned testnet. However, developers still have to consider, okay, how are we going to move forward in light of the Sepolia testnet, in light of Holesky, which is still, again, in a state where developers are trying to restore it. Most of the smart contracts and the application developers were testing on Holesky. And so one of the big questions that developers were wrestling with on the latest call is how to move forward with Pectra in such a way where stakeholders have adequate infrastructure to be able to test Pectra features in lieu of Holesky. So let's talk about the new game plan that developers have thought of, that developers are moving forward with in the meanwhile. Now that the Holesky and the Sepolia testnet upgrades are done with, developers are still, wrestling with the ramifications of Holesky, but now they have to look forward to creating new milestones, new plans for getting Pectra ready for mainnet. The two upgrades are out of the way. What are they going to do next? Well, developers have agreed that they are going to create a clone of the Holesky testnet. This clone is also called a shadow fork Developers have done shadow forks for major upgrades like the merge. I believe they did a shadow fork for almost every single upgrade since the merge on Ethereum, of which there was only two, Shanghai and Denkun. But anyways, the developers are going to replicate the state of Holesky. Of course, not the state of non-finalization, but the state of all the smart contracts, all of the transaction activity that has happened on Holesky up until the point of Pectra activation. And this will ensure that any kind of testing that stakeholders would have done on the original Holesky testnet, they can now do on this new network. And one of the asks of developers to ensure that it is an adequate substitute for the original Holesky testnet was to spin up Holesky with the clone, the shadow fork of Holesky, with as many nodes, as many validators as the original Holesky testnet. And developers are able to do this in such a way where developers can kind of mimic the same client diversity as the original Holesky testnet, and in all ways really try and get the Holesky testnet as close to the Holesky shadow fork, as close to the original as possible. Of course, there are custom node setups on Holesky. Again, the vast majority of nodes that are being operated to support the Holesky testnet is not operated by the Ethereum Foundation. And so for the Ethereum Foundation to create this new testnet, it won't have, of course, the same kind of diversity in stakeholders and actors from the get-go. But developers are confident that they can try and get it pretty close. One of the developers on the call, on the ACD call, Perry, most recent one, Perry had said that the Ethereum Foundation should be able to support the Holesky shadow fork with 1,000 nodes, which is roughly the amount of nodes that is on the original Holesky testnet. So that is what developers are planning on moving forward with to allow the ecosystem to be able to adequately test their infrastructure in lieu of Holesky. They are also, again, trying to restore the original Holesky testnet. So that's the game plan for now. Once developers have launched the shadow fork of Holesky, which Perry had mentioned could happen as early as next week. So this podcast is being recorded on a Friday, and by the time my listeners will be catching this episode, it will have been next week. So everybody keep an eye out for when the shadow fork goes live. And I'll, of course, have an update on the next Infinite Jungle episode. And then developers are going to see how that shadow fork fares. Are there any other bugs that developers should be fixing? How prepared is the ecosystem? Are major staking pools like Lido satisfied with their integrations of Pectra? Are they catching any bugs in Pectra code or any other aspects of client software? There will probably be additional testing infrastructure that is created as well. I believe the Ethereum Foundation will still move ahead with having shadow forks where Pectra is activated on Ethereum mainnet. Of course, not Ethereum mainnet itself, but clones of the Ethereum mainnet, shadow forks of Ethereum mainnet. And so the testing timeline for Ethereum has indeed lengthened. Usually for Ethereum upgrades, if both the public testnet launches go well, then developers are full steam ahead for upgrading Ethereum mainnet. Lo and behold, the public testnet upgrades did not go well. And Ethereum developers have stressed to me that the issue that made it so that these upgrades didn't go well on the testnets is not because of Pectra. It is because of these unique qualities of how the deposit contracts are handled on the testnets. But I think it just speaks also to the readiness of client teams in general. Not specifically to the readiness of Pectra code, but the readiness of client teams, the readiness of other aspects of client software, such as the deposit contract configuration, such as the resilience of consensus layer client teams in periods of non-finality. These are all other aspects of client code that developers, in light of what has happened on the testnets, are now fixing, are now upgrading, making sure that these will not become issues on Ethereum mainnet. So these issues have indeed lengthened the timeline, and developers are now looking ahead to additional milestones that have had to be created because the testnets did not fare well, but rather fared poorly. A couple of takeaways that I want to share on this episode that have changed since I recorded my last episode covering what went down on Holesky. I am more optimistic on this episode that everything that has happened on the Holesky and the Sepolia testnets do not spell doom and gloom on the readiness and the capabilities of client teams to be able to safely upgrade Ethereum. I maintain, of course, that safety should always be a top priority for Ethereum developers and client teams. However, rather than Holesky and Sepolia being kind of setbacks for Ethereum developers in terms of their commitment to upgrading Ethereum in a safe way, these incidents are wake-up calls. These incidents are learning opportunities for Ethereum developers to be able to upgrade Ethereum safely for the long run. And I highlight, again, a couple of reasons why. Number one, all of the learnings that have come from this, all of the learnings about what consensus layer clients do in a state of prolonged non-finality, these are extremely great learnings for improving the resilience of the Ethereum protocol long term. Communication, how developers are communicating with applications, with major staking pools, with infrastructure providers during a state of, oh, there's a bug, we need everybody to upgrade. The communication rails, all of the protocols and the processes in place for developers to get the word out there. I think it's flexing a muscle that perhaps hasn't been flexed in a while. Developers are using the Holesky and the Sepolia incidents as testing grounds for coordination, coordinating what happens when an upgrade doesn't quite go according to plan. I think this is a great opportunity for the ecosystem, especially on Holesky. This is a comment that was shared by a representative from the Lido team on the latest ACD call, that they're going to be able to test applications like Lido in bunker mode, in a mode where oracles have failed, the liveness, the state of finality on the network has not there is no finality on the network. How does an application, a major application like Lido, respond and recover in these kinds of events? So there are a ton of learnings that are already coming out in the aftermath of these testnet upgrades. And I will note that I was under the impression that developers have never so seriously kind of failed in upgrading testnets and lead up to an upgrade before, but I have been corrected. Developers, I was going to share this more at the end of the show, but I have an episode coming out soon, the next day actually, when people listen to this episode, with Ethereum Foundation DevOps engineer Perry and Geth developer Marius. And on that episode, you'll see them share that actually in lead up to the merge, developers did break testnets. Of course, they didn't break testnets to the point where the testnet became unusable for a month, but they did break testnets, and there were issues on these testnets, on these public testnets, that required developers to create hotfixes. So developers are taking all of this as a learning opportunity, and also to be able to know and to be able to fix this in such a way where the pressure of none of this happening on mainnet, all of this happening in a testing environment, is really kind of the silver lining, that developers can get all these learnings and the ecosystem can grow more resilient from all these learnings, all through what happened on a testnet and not what happened on mainnet. So I've definitely come around to thinking of what has happened in more of this light of, thank goodness none of this happened on mainnet. And all of these learnings will be useful for making mainnet, Ethereum mainnet, that much stronger and that much more resilient. Of course, because the timeline for Pectra is delayed, developers on the latest ACD call did not mention at all about to what extent the timeline for for Pectra would be delayed. They didn't mention any dates, didn't mention any kind of estimations for when Pectra could go live on mainnet. They're going to wait and see how the Holesky shadow fork goes, wait to see the recovery of the Holesky testnet, how that goes. However, I maintain, of course, still that this spells at least a couple of weeks delay for Pectra mainnet activation. I don't think that it's likely Pectra will be activated on mainnet according to the initial timeline of early April. However, the extended timeline, however long that may be, a few weeks or even a month, that's good because it gives the ecosystem, the Ethereum ecosystem, more time to prepare for Pectra, to be able to for wallet providers to be able to prepare for the EIP 7702, the increased flexibility in EOAs, externally owned user-controlled accounts. This will allow more time for staking pools like Lido to be able to prepare for validator consolidations. It gives more time for the ecosystem to get on board with the upgrade. It's not a bad thing that Pectra is moving a little bit slower than the ecosystem or developers intended. It's almost as though the complexity and the size of Ethereum's ecosystem has kind of forced developers to move a bit slower on a more delayed timeline. But for all of these benefits of these learnings about Ethereum's state, how Ethereum consensus layer clients can fare in a state of prolonged non-finality, these learnings of how to better coordinate during periods where there is a hotfix or a bug that needs to be reported and updated in validator node operators. All of these learnings will be useful, and again, the silver lining is that all of it has happened on a testnet and not Ethereum mainnet. And secondly, I will also give a shout out to the fact that through all of these incidents, both of these incidents, I should say, and sure, even incidents in the past not related to Pectra, but just related to other aspects or close calls, as I've called them on Ethereum mainnet, Ethereum developers continue to maintain a attitude of openness, of transparency, and of complete not trying to hide anything. So one of the cool things is that when any of these bugs have been discovered on Holesky, there's been issues reported. All of that is happening on a public Discord, a research and development Ethereum-focused research and development channel that anybody can contribute to, that anybody can notify developers, hey, this looks very odd, this transaction in a block is causing issues, or I think this is what the issue is, to be able to coordinate fixes and coordinate responses to incidents on a testnet with complete openness and transparency. It allows various voices to people that have a strong knowledge of Ethereum but aren't necessarily a quote-unquote core developer to be able to jump in and to be able to help. And that's certainly what happened on the Sepolia testnet incident. Their shout out to a person who has the pseudonym Cat with the Hat, Cat in the Hat, Cat Hat something. They contributed to helping developers figure out and resolve the issue that was happening on Sepolia. The episode that I'm going to be having with Perry and Marius that's coming out tomorrow I highly encourage my listeners to listen to that episode because their takes and their views on what's going on with Holesky, what's going on with Pectra, is extremely genuine. It's very honest. And it sheds light on how developers are viewing what's going on. And I think it helps set the narrative for Ethereum in a more accurate and realistic tone. My first impression, of course, of all that was going on with the Holesky and the Sepolia testnet upgrades was quite poor. My take was that the upgrade was not going well, and of course this is still true. The upgrade is not going as smoothly. Preparations to test the upgrade, prepare it for mainnet, is not going as smoothly as developers intended. However, all of the learnings and all of the response to what has happened on these testnets is completely open, is completely honest and transparent. And that's one of the strongest benefits and strengths of Ethereum that I will share again on this show. I feel like I've shouted this out before, but Ethereum's decentralization, which because Ethereum is so decentralized and there is no centralized authority that's calling the shots, no single person that has all of the power to make or break Ethereum, that means that because of Ethereum's decentralization, there is an opportunity for any voice, any stakeholder to be able to hop in and support support Ethereum protocol development. Because Ethereum is so decentralized, it means that Ethereum protocol development, covering what's going on Ethereum, covering Ethereum protocol development, is not gated by a single organization or a single group of people. The messaging is completely organic. What I do is I'm lurking on the Discords. I'm lurking on X. I'm listening to public ACD calls that anybody can join. All of the incident calls to rewrite Sepolia, to restore Holesky, these are public Zoom calls that I was able to join as soon as these calls were scheduled. And I think that is such a testament that even in this state of high stress, high pressure that developers are under to try and fix whatever the issue is, they are not there is no blocker to having help, to having new voices come in to help the situation, for people to cover in real time what's going on with Ethereum. It's just real. Ethereum is a real decentralized open source technology, and the incidents of these last couple weeks truly prove that. So that's another silver lining. That's another win, and something that I hope my listeners and me more recently that I'm celebrating in light of what's happened. So yeah, I guess it's like a bit of a 180 from the way that I was speaking about things in light of what happened on Holesky. And a lot of this really was colored by my conversation, which my listeners will be able to hear and get on the next Infinite Jungle episode, which is coming out on Wednesday with Perry and Marius. Of course, what has happened on Ethereum, on the Ethereum Sepolia and Ethereum Holesky testnet, is not ideal. That is true. It's not ideal. Ideally, things would have gone smoother. However, the response, all that has happened in light of it to address these issues, I think is a win, is something to celebrate, and is something that's going to have lasting benefits for Ethereum in the long run. I also think it affirms the truly uniquely kind of decentralized and open source nature of Ethereum governance and protocol development, which is Ethereum's strength. Thank you so much to all of my listeners for listening to another episode of the Infinite Jungle. That was the show for today. I hope that you learned something new about Ethereum. I hope that you'll join again for a new episode. Please do check out my episode with Perry and Marius. It really was a great conversation. It gave me... Yeah, it enlightened me in many ways. I am signing off from the concrete jungle that is New York City. Yes, I am back in the city, back in NYC. We'll be here for the next foreseeable future, for the next couple weeks, at the very least. Yes, I'm glad to be, back in the chaotic state of this city, that it feels like New York is always kind of in a chaotic state. But anyways, back in New York City, back in the concrete jungle. For all of my listeners, wherever you are in your explorations of the infinite jungle that is Ethereum, stay safe out there.